Dr. Shakia Bland, math educator in residence with Just Equations. And welcome to the session Responsive Mathematics Activating Policies, Practices, and Resources. And before I introduce our phenomenal panel and moderator, I encourage everyone to use the chat feature that in order to communicate with one another, it's located on the right side of your screen. And then also to communicate with the panelists, please use the Q&A function, which is located next to the chat icon. And I already see some of you have already located the emoji. So at the bottom of the screen, there is a reaction icon. So please support our speakers and show us that you're engaged in the session by selecting the applause emoji or hearts and so forth. Thank you so much. In this session, our dynamic speakers will discuss how ensuring that school is engaging and relevant to students has long been recognized as a feature of good teaching. However, this strategy has not always permeated the math classroom. Culturally responsive math instruction and curriculum increase interest and enjoyment in math classrooms. So, we're going to contextualize math in a way that is real for students, engages them more authentically with the content. I want to give a special thank you to the session co sponsors, Todos Mathematics for All and the Benjamin Banneker Association. And now I have the honor of introducing our phenomenal panelist and moderator. Miss Ashley Kearney is an award-winning secondary mathematics educator and community organizer in Washington, D.C. As a first-generation college student, Ms. Kearney is motivated by the belief that all students deserve a quality education and the power of empowered educators and the importance of mathematics education in intergenerational mobility, improving our understanding of ourselves and the world, and the safety and success of our nation. Dr. Josephine Louis is a highly experienced researcher specializing in providing new insights into education policy, STEM education, technology, integration, and social science. Drawing on her extensive expertise in quantitative and qualitative research methodologies, she is the principal investigator of multiple projects funded by the National Science Foundation. Dr. Shelley Jones is a professor of mathematics education at Central Connecticut State University, and she teaches undergraduate mathematics content and methods courses for pre-service teachers, as well as graduate level mathematics content curriculum and STEM courses for in-service teachers. She provides mathematics professional development nationally and internationally. And our moderator, Miss Diana Seja is a mathematics educator with more than 24 years of experience in the field. She is the administrator for the Riverside County Office of Education Instructional Services. She serves as president of Todos Mathematics for All, an equity based international professional organization. And Deanna is a former classroom teacher, bilingual resource teacher, instructional coach, intervention specialist, school site administrator, county administrator, and has represented mathematics educators on the board of California Mathematics Council. I turn the mic over and the platform to Ms. Seha. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. I am so honored and excited to be here today with these amazing humans. I think we're going to hear some really nice nuggets, and we're really going to kind of engage in a conversation in between our short micro presentations. So I'm really looking forward to that. Those impromptu kind of conversations that will spur from what we hear from these women today. We're going to go ahead. And I'm going to turn it over to Ashley because she's going to start us off.
Okay, thank you kindly. All right. First of all, good day to everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm going to start with some images on the screen. I just kind of want you to react in the chat if you can. It would take a couple of seconds. I'm showing a picture, the first picture on the screen, with a foot stepping on a laptop. And so I'm curious about the reactions or the emotions that are evoked when you see this particular image. If you could respond in the chat. If not, I want you thinking about those things. Just take a second here. Expensive mistake. Okay, I can relate. I'm going to show you another image. This is a laptop in the rain. Same thing. Or when you reacting to it, what's the first thing that come to mind? How do you feel? What are you thinking when you see this particular picture? And as you get your thoughts together, I'm going to show you a last one that I really want thoughts on. This third image, right? And if you're someone who has raised many of nieces and nephews alongside siblings, then you probably have one opinion where how do we let this child get near this computer, right? We're thinking about things that can happen in a nanosecond. But I've done a presentation recently, and some of those responses include a baby being introduced to a computer at this particular age and what that could mean, right? How much more advanced. And someone used to say, like, the pandemic babies can do things like this. So just the emotions that evoke when you look at these particular things. But what's most important, though, if you could change the slide, what's most important thinking about these computers is that the most powerful computer known is the brain, right? Is the human brain. The most powerful computer is the human brain. So as we think about that, I'm going to move forward and talk about as educators, we're asked to be tasked with the responsibility of ensuring student success. And with that comes creating the conditions for our students to be able to thrive. And I know myself growing up, my mom would walk me up this tall hill and we would just say, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And that has stuck with me for so long. And just thinking about the growth mindset that happens in our perspectives on growth mindset and encouraging those things in our classroom. There are three texts that I'm going to show you on this slide. And these are not obviously all the texts that you can think about. But as I thought about my practice, I thought about what texts have come to mind for this particular topic first off the bat. And I thought a crosswalk of the concept in these texts can support answering the question about what is culturally relevant in responsive mathematics education. And in some spaces, responsive mathematics education could relate to eliciting the background information, right, to make connections for moving forward. But how that is done is important and is effective when executed in culturally responsive ways. So I follow the belief that context is important, experience is everything. And so for these short presentations, I'm looking at responsive mathematics, this title of activating policies, practices, and resources from a personal reflective lens where some key elements from my experience are elevated, and not just for over the decade of experience I have in teaching secondary mathematics, but more holistically. And I think it started with the text before I even thought about being a math teacher fully. I was just volunteering, but I was reading this text in a leadership class, and I was about 20 years old. So this is the Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And it talks about how the brain is hardwired to give emotions the upper hand. And so, starting with emotional intelligence, I feel can be instrumental in the process of becoming a culturally responsive teacher. And so, just quickly, I want to talk about with these three texts, things that stood out to me that come to mind when I think about this particular presentation. First, the first text, right? The first text, emotional intelligence, really dives into the fact that everything you sense, right, has to pass through your limbic system to get to the frontal lobe. And as a result, we feel before we're even able to think. We feel before we're even able to think. There are two concepts in the book that talks about personal competence and social competence, but personal competence starting with you as an individual, right, and your behavior and your tendencies, and our social competence talking about the social awareness and relationship management. And we know anything, we know that classroom, any type of classroom, particularly mathematics, it does talk about, it relies on the importance of a quality relationship. And so I lead that to thinking about, mathematical mindsets. And mathematical mindsets, what stood out to me in this book early as a professional is that mindsets are critically important because research has shown that they lead to different learning behaviors, right? So it leads to the learning behaviors. And we know that different learning behaviors create different outcomes for students, right? And it's all about what outcomes we want to be true for our students. So mathematics, beyond any subject in this particular text, it talks about how the power of math being able to crush students' spirits, right? And how students absorb messages throughout our math classrooms through many aspects of mathematics teaching. And the evidence suggesting that the difference between the students that succeed and those who don't is not a matter of uh, uh, their brain, right? It's not a matter of it's not their brain that we're born with. It's more so the approach to life and the messages that they receive about their potential, which is highly critical. So that leads me to talk about this last text, which is one of my favorites. So we think about culturally responsive teaching and the brain. I loved how this text talks about the needs to have rich background, right? Because responsive mathematics is listening background, but it goes more on the background, not just content background, but cultural background, cultural competence and problem solving, and teachers needing an adequate background knowledge, usable information, right, in order to have responsive tools and strategies. And so I think for this one, what stood out is the deep culture that governs how we learn information and how the brain is encoding itself with this sort of worldview. And even if you come from a different background, having an understanding of the worldview impacts students' experience in the classroom. And the last thing that's pulled from this text that I really thought was important is that the brain, two main directives are to stay safe and to be happy. And the main purpose of the brain is to get smarter at surviving and thriving in life, which leads me to my next slide, right? Wherein, as I think about uh, what does it take for students to survive and what does it take for students to thrive in a math classroom, I think about the power of emotion, literally the power of emotion. And first and foremost, I think for me, we all have our philosophy. In secondary mathematics, it was often the first thing on my classroom syllabus. And um, in the classroom, though, you have these class values and the co-created vision, and you have your goals and so on and so forth. But the bullet points that you see displayed on your screen are not representative of the list of the affirmation parts of the classroom that I just spoke about, but rather a non-exhaustive list of themes that resonated with me as I reflect on the ways that those class values and goals and practices and procedures, policies are activated day to day with the intent that students are positioned to thrive. And so, for example, right, I started in middle school mathematics, and anyone who was in middle school mathematics know that that's a training ground. I stand by that. I understood very quickly in middle school mathematics the power of emotion. With over a decade of experience in the classroom and several documented successes, I know that emotion is the key ingredient. And so I made an effort, first and foremost, to always plan for emotion. Emotion being the beginning, being the middle, the end of a high quality task, the whole class, the unit, even the year, celebrations, class roles, anything that you can think of, planning around emotion, thinking about intentional interactions, people, intentional interaction with content, etc. And for me, emotion was the long game, right? The long game. Connected to emotion is this idea of action, both verbal and nonverbal. Action being the class values that are living, breathing, and celebrated through collectivism or reflection. And I think that this action is modeled and reciprocated. And these actions of learning about ourselves and reflecting on what we learn about ourselves beyond the classroom and applying it in the way that we choose to show up. This is giving voice to choice, is making sure that we are captains, right? And there are many things in the classroom that can lead students to believe that they're the captain of their learning. The messaging for me as an educator, internalizing and ensuring that even with the context in mind, showing up in attendance is half the battle. You being there is 50, right? So then what? It comes with being intimate, again, policies, intimate with the grading policies and practices, and truly thinking about the emotion students need in order to be positively positioned and feel and sincerely believe they are captains of their own ship, right? And it's the way funded by like why we communicate. It's on you. You can say it's on you. I got mine. You got to get yours, right? Or like how do we communicate? It's on you. If you play cards like me with my great grandmother, it's on you means your play. You have choice. It's your strategy, right? How are you going to command that? Um, and I think this the last point I'm going to make that doesn't hit on all the points, but uh, for me as a classroom leader, but also being on executive councils and things, even leading organizing work in coalitions as a teacher leader, that's what I was doing. It helped me to see and make value of making $1 out of 15 cents. So we know that from these different contexts and dealing with our students that we don't always have all the resources, and we have to do what's in the locus of our control. However, in the face of certain circumstances, there are things that we can do to give our students that exposure, particularly if we're dealing with scheduling issues, thinking about detracting with exposure, thinking about how we combat impoverished mathematics, thinking about frequently and consistently going beyond the curriculum and beyond the classroom. And so I'm going to show you a few, one image that comes to mind, if you could. And this image is important because I think about one, starting with self, right? These practices and policies show up more as understanding yourself, right? Your values. And then we have practices and policies of classrooms, right? In the school, we have practices and policies in society and the community. But by you looking at just the dimensions of this, right? Self being just a portion of the classroom, classroom being just a portion of community, right? There's so much to learn outside of self, outside of classroom, right? In the community that allows us to gain perspective and then be unapologetic about the request for resources that we make. So there was a transition where I was just going to things and coming back with strategies for my classroom to use in my classroom, resources to use in my classroom. But I transitioned to thinking about connecting resources and tools to my classroom and vice versa. Understanding when my class is a representative sample of what is happening in decision making and when it's not, and what I'm going to do about it, which evoked emotion for me to feel a certain way, act a certain way, facilitate my classroom in a certain way. There are particular images that I'm going to show you in the essence of time. And the first one, you're looking at a picture of me visiting the International Spy Museum, and then follow in the second picture is a substitute teacher that I was talking to in the teacher's lounge. He was a long-term sub. I'm talking to him about my experience at the International Spy Museum, and come to find out, he has experience working all over the world with certain topics that I then was able to connect to a unit on factoring polynomials to where I brought him in to be a speaker. And at first glance, it might look like I'm bringing him in as a speaker. He's talking to the students. Students, you see different emotions, might not be interested, all those types of things. However, it's all about emotion. Emotion on the pictures that he used on the board, the medals that he had, black male, suited up, all of these things, and my hidden objective of respecting your elders. So if you look at the next picture that comes up, you'll see shortly within that same period, right? We're talking about decoding messages. Students are involved. They're talking like the way he is positioned as a substitute teacher and respecting his authority in the classroom shows up in that way. And it shows up in the way that we position our classroom and our values. I'm going to skip a couple of pictures down so you can go one where he gets a certificate and so does the student of the week. But this picture here that I'm going to show you is a student who talked about being late. We did a lot of reflections around tardies, those types of things, and realized he had transportation issues because it's a citywide school. DC uses public transportation. Well, that experience turned into him speaking at a transportation forum. Of course, it did for my classroom. It would. So he speaks at a transportation forum in front of city leaders. That then turns into us having his mom and his business, his soap business, outside in the hallway where people can actually pay for his business and learn about that, to mix the two. Because again, he had transportation issues, so him coming across town for a forum, we wanted to make sure that we balance that out. So having leadership and understanding all of who students are, all of their experience, and the parents, and bringing them in and understanding how they can drive their own learning is important. This resulted in this student coming to back to class, right, in a unit where we were thinking about topics around data visualizations in the way that they show up in policy making. He was able to speak to his experience and also use my article that I read on the train that morning about uh, the job that someone had about creating detours in the city. So the discussion became, you have this transportation issue. These are the policies. You created the roundtable. And now, not only are we looking at data representations, but we're now thinking about, okay, well, what if I had this job? What would be the benefit of having this student in that position to create detours in the city around transportation? How might the personal experience and expertise influence the way that they design the detours? And what added context may support those persons most impacted by transportation interruption, right? In that same unit was a student who I had nominated to be on the district's cabinet board. And as a result, he's also in the class. I leveraged his outside of class role for him to lead in that roundtable so he can set his agenda for a meeting that he wanted to propose with the district. So that way, all of these things become holistic. I'm going to drop down one more picture and then I'll close up soon. I want to drop down to this. Just go down one more. There you go. The there was one student who had is one back, but one student who had shown that he was a little bit disinterested. And I was getting to know this student very early on with conferences. Come to find out, I had never had him before. Conversation with his parent talked about how he had spiraled right negatively, but in the previously he had a huge a positive experience with mathematics. So it came to him going to Howard with me and seeing peers in an award-winning robotics program that allowed us to think about how can you now bring that program back to the school. It wasn't that he didn't like math. It wasn't that he couldn't do math. It was just his new orientation to school and classroom, what he thought was important. Uh, I think that I'm going to drop down all the way to the end. I thought I would be good on timing here, all the way to the end of keep going, keep going. And if you want to connect with me on some of these ideas, that would be great. I'm going to keep going one more right here. I'm going to stop here, wherein at the end of the course, we have a reflection. And this reflection is important. And I have a couple of it that show different student reflections. But this one says, my experience was very fruitful learning to use successive differences with a lawn care business and being a spies, opened my eyes and my imagination to help me realize that I can work and have fun. This helped me to connect my math side as I help my peers. In the general course reflection regarding this experience in the course, student says, if all my math classes are taught like this, I can become Albert Einstein. This class helped me a lot. And then I'll go to the last slide where you can see my contact information. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ashley. Um, as I was listening to you talking, I kept thinking about that power of emotion, right? And you mentioned that before we can think, we have to process through feeling. Um, and I'm wondering, um, what is the role of a teacher leaders? What role do we play as we try to create environments that are more responsive, right? Where the mathematics is more responsive to the students' needs and their feelings, not just their thinking. And I'm going to open up that question to any one of the three of you so that we can build on what Ashley was sharing with us.
I think the role of the teacher leadership plays in responsive mathematics is it gives you the context of having a whole picture, thinking about experience, thinking about ways in which we can show up for students using our different roles and not just having that be in the classroom itself. So it creates buy-in, it creates engagement, and it allows students to see themselves in the mathematics and to say the why behind the math becomes visible. It's not just about the immediate next lesson, right? It's about how do I show up as a mathematician already? And then what does that look like if I want to fulfill certain roles? And now careers become visible to the students that didn't become visible at first. Now I see a title and I think about how that context played out in class, me interacting with the math that related to it. And now it's a no-brainer that I can do it. It's self-efficacy.
So I think that's really important because I'm thinking just of the stories that I'm hearing with a lot of classroom teachers right now. And they struggle with behaviors, right? Behaviors that they wish weren't happening in their classrooms. And I think that's type of a communication, right? Behaviors is a type of communication. And how much of that would be mitigated if we were coming in at the instruction through this emotional lens instead, right? Through this responsive lens. I think that that would have a big benefit on what teachers are experiencing, right? Because it's been really difficult, I think, for teachers right now. Um, so I'm also kind of wondering what does the contextualizing math in this kind of a way, Ashley, as you were sharing, how does it make it real for students to support success in the math classroom? So what would that success look like? How would it manifest?
I think it manifests in outcomes. It manifests in students knowing what they want. It manifests in them exploring pathways and all that math has to offer. And it manifests in supporting the teacher leadership to go out and do more and learn more to bring back to the classroom so that experience could be co-created. It creates a space where students see themselves as mathematicians and mathematicians as a way of life and as what already exists.
That's, I think, really, really powerful. I am going to turn it over to Joe because I think Joe is going to talk to us a little bit about data and how this collection of data kind of is going to connect to kind of what Ashley was saying and how we can build on that through the use of data. So, Joe, it's the
Great.
mic is yours.
Great. Thank you. So let's see if my slides will come up. Are you able to advance to my slides? Or should I just start? There we go. Yay. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I am going to share about an effort to engage students in statistics with data investigations of social justice issues. And so, as people have said, my name is Jo Louie, and I am a senior research scientist at Education Development Center, or EDC. Next slide, please. And yes, and I am trying to advance my own slides, which are not working. So EDC has been a leader in developing equity-focused math curriculum and teacher professional development and STEM education programs since 1958. So we've been around for a little while. Next slide, please. And I just want to be able to, let's see, why, here we go. If I can just, I've lost my ability to advance my own slides. So yes, the context of all of this is of the work that I do is that we live in a world that is filled with data. And statistical and data literacy are critical skills for students of all ages at this point. And if you can advance to the next slide, please. But many schools have not been engaging students in statistics and data, and partly because topics and methods of statistics instruction are frequently removed from the practices of current day data analysts and data scientists. You can move to the next slide, please. And one of the projects I lead is called Strengthening Data Literacy Across the Curriculum, and it's funded by the National Science Foundation. We have developed high school curriculum materials to make data literacy and statistics education more relevant, engaging, and empowering for students, particularly students from historically marginalized groups. And we have a website, go.edc.org/USS which provides free access to all the materials that we have developed. Next slide, please. And so we have developed 2 3-week-long curriculum modules that address social justice issues. One module focuses on investigating income inequality in the US, and another module focuses on immigration to the US. Next slide, please. And the modules involve data investigations that have a purpose, and they are grounded in a 4-step data investigation cycle. They begin with compelling and provocative questions, such as, how much income inequality exists between men and women in the US? And are immigrants less likely than those born in the US to be employed? Students then, they assemble data, they conduct their data analyses, and they summarize conclusions to address the original questions that they set out to answer. Next slide, please. And to answer questions in our modules, students use large-scale, anonymized, person-level microdata from the US Census Bureau. And they look at random samples of individuals from throughout the United States, which we have made available to them through a free browser-based and student-friendly data visualization platform called CODAP. So for example, CODAP allows students to see data visualizations of the mean and the median of the income distribution in the US by sex, and to see what percentages of the US-born and immigrants are employed, or in the graph that you can see in this slide, what percentages of US-born and immigrants live in different regions of the US. And we collected research data on using these modules in 6 schools with 7 mathematics teachers from 210 high school students who are predominantly Black, Latino or Latina, and from low-income families in Massachusetts. And our data suggests that the approach is promising because we found statistically significant gains in student learning of core statistical concepts and significant gains in student interest in statistics and data analysis as well. Next slide, please. So I just spoke about that slide. You can move on to the next one. And I provide more specifics in this slide, but basically we found these gains for both modules that we developed, even during the pandemic, when one of our modules was implemented remotely and all sorts of craziness was going on, difficulties, struggles, challenges were going on in schools. And next slide, please. And so I'll be showing a video in just less than a minute, but here are some quotes from students who used our materials. In focus group interviews, students shared with us reactions such as, "It made me have a new appreciation for math and especially statistics in general. And this was probably the most fun I've had in math in a very long time and the most interesting thing I've done in years." Next slide, please. And another student said, "It's real data. It's not made up. That was the thing that makes it interesting. It's real." And then the next slide, please. Another student shared, "I think we need to do more of these modules in school, to be honest with you. A lot of people are afraid to talk about issues like that. But if more kids tackle it head on, they'll have a better understanding of how our world really works." So now, I hope the technology works, but we have a video. Don't listen to me. Here's a student sharing his reactions.
Honestly, I never found it interesting before doing all these lessons. Like when we first were introduced, I was like, oh, this is gonna be boring. But then we got further and further deep into it. I was like, oh my God, I'm actually understanding it by using real life like scenarios, real life like data. It got me just so hooked onto it. So yeah, so going back through like all my years of math, it was just the teacher would write something on the board, we'd copy it, we'd get a test, boom, it's either 100 or you pass or fail. But in statistics with these lessons, we start off with the major idea, like the big idea, and then we got to go even further and further deeper down in the lessons with the same data. Like we wouldn't just leave it be or like let it go. It would come back to us and we had to keep remembering it, which was fascinating because it just made us go further and further and further. And then I got into smaller and smaller parts, and then it just got me like, oh my God, I can figure out this even more, but I can take this set of data that I figured out in the last lesson and bring it to this part. And it just kept going and rolling and rolling. So I never forget it. That's what made me love statistics so much. This could really help us in the near future because you can also make a lot of predictions. You can make a lot of like theories as well. Like, oh, you're interested in a topic like, let's say, how often do students like drop out of high school and depending on what? And they can show us like where they live, the poverty, the where they're originated from, their age, if they dropped out or haven't dropped out. And then you can start building up theories and more ideas. And then you can also predict like what could happen in the near future. And that's what makes it really interesting. I'd say topics about like immigrants and like personal like information about us and ourselves. It's not really talked a lot about now that I think about it. This was probably one of the biggest most like we've ever discussed as a class about something really personal for once. But like this is the first time I'd say we've used like real world data, and it's just fascinating how different it is compared to like what we usually been doing in the class. And with these lessons, it got me thinking like, oh, so these are important. Like I should like know these. I need to understand these because one day this could be really useful for me.
And that was it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I really enjoyed watching the student. I feel like when Ashley mentioned earlier about the most powerful computer is the brain. And just listening to that young student kind of think about how he kept getting smaller, getting closer, getting deeper, getting right, that zooming in process and not being able to forget and just kind of sharing what he experienced, um, his thinking, right, and kind of the joy and excitement and curiosity that it created was really, really powerful. And I'm just wondering, ladies, when we use data to create new opportunities for students, how does this give them opportunities to share their gifts? And how do we communicate that their contributions matter?
I can jump in with some thoughts. Working with data, I mean, data are information, right? And data are information that we or students themselves can collect about topics that they care about. And or data are out there. There's more and more data that are open data about topics that students care about. And so I don't know if this is going to be a preview to some of what Dr. Jones will say later on, but data really, they are a mirror and they provide a window into our own lives and other people's lives. And giving students the skills and the opportunity to explore about the world that they want to learn about, issues that they care about, but quantitatively, because data are plural. And data are quantitative analysis of data allows us to look at more than just one datum, one data point. They allow us to look at multiple data points over time for individuals or for populations. And they allow students and all of us to learn about groups and group outcomes and how people fare over time. And natural issues of social justice come up with you can't measure social justice without looking at group data. You need statistics to measure what is just and unjust with groups and group outcomes. And this is naturally what students care about, and especially this age, what's fair, what's unfair. And so equipping students with the tools to be able to learn about themselves and their world, we have found in our research is really empowering for them. I have more quotes from students where they were saying, and I'm quoting, I felt like we were our own statisticians analyzing data after doing these modules. It's that kind of empowerment. And where it's not just learning and reading about the world with data, but also if data literacy and being able to analyze data is about reading data and writing with data, having agency with data too, communicating with data, having the skills and the ability to analyze data and share your findings with others and to persuade and to change people's opinions and make change in the world. There are students who were saying things as well, like, well, you always hear about it. There's income inequality between different genders. And then we actually looked at the data and wow, this is real. People aren't just making things up. This is a real problem. And hopefully we can figure something out. I'm quoting there. It can be, for some people without the right supports, it can be depressing, I suppose. But then with the right supports, it can be empowering. We can do something. We now know what some of these issues are. Let's think together about how we can take action in the world. So those are just a few thoughts.
And Joe, one of the things I'll add is even when students don't feel like they can directly impact something, we can help them to see that there are organizations out there advocating and working on behalf of, let's say, income equality. So even when they're not able to do it on their own, as the instructor, we can make sure that they are aware that these things are being looked at. Different organizations, we can put them in touch with those organizations so that if they do want to take a stand, that they can.
And I can also jump in. I'm working with another NSF-funded project where students are incorporating data into their social studies civics classes. And sometimes the grain size of the data and the topics that you look at can open up opportunities for students to make more of a difference. So just an example where some students for their civics project decided to look at the bathrooms in their high school because many of them were closed, were broken, or students were vaping in them and they don't feel safe going in there. And they did a survey in their high school about how people feel about their bathrooms and the safety issues. And they brought it to the administrators, their findings. And through that act, they started to have a conversation with administrators and realized, oh, the administrators, they do care. They just didn't know how we felt. And they felt very empowered to be able to have that dialogue with their administrators. Another example is with the city, where students were documenting potholes in the road. And the city people said, you know what? We can hire you to help us document these potholes because we don't have enough staff to track them all. And the students really cared. And so this is another situation where students started to feel, I can help make a difference, not only helping the city document the potholes, but to tell other people there's this number you can call and tell them because they want to know, they want to help us. So these are some other examples as well.
Sure.
I think those are really powerful stories. There was a question on the Q&A from Kit Golden where he makes a comment that ELA teachers have these conversations around text to self, text to text, and text to the world, but we don't have an equivalent conversation in math class. And I feel like these conversations around data, I think is a response, is a very similar conversation, right? What is the real world versus what's real in the world, right? And exposing students to what's actually real. The world is real, and then the data is out there. We don't need to have these contrived things, and then kids can be really, really engaged and contribute to society, not just into their classroom environment, but to society. I'm going to pass on the mic over to Shelly because Shelly's going to close us off, and it's all yours, Shelly.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, we are actually going to start with a poll. So I thank you all for being here. And I will be talking about culturally relevant pedagogy or teaching. And I want to know now, where do we find the poll? Where can everybody find the poll? Is it to the right? So you're going to be letting me know. Oh, okay, it just pops up. Okay. So you'll let us know when was your first experience at culturally relevant teaching? Elementary school, middle school, high school, college, or you never had it as a student, but maybe you have experienced it as an educator. Let's get about 30 more seconds for you to answer the poll. I'm hoping everybody's able to vote. Okay, we're going to close the poll in about 5 more seconds. Okay, so a few people have experienced culturally relevant teaching in elementary school, a few in middle school, high school, more in higher ed, which that's good to know, but some never. 20%, a little over 20% never. And then many of you, thankfully, once you became an educator. So I'm glad to hear that. But my colleagues and I, we've been working with culturally relevant teaching for a while. And what we find is that many educators did not experience culturally relevant teaching as a student themselves. Therefore, without having had the experience of culturally relevance when they were a student, it's difficult to determine what it really looks like as a teacher. What should it be? So I would say one way of thinking about it is think of what you wish you had when you were in a math classroom. I mean, it's as simple as that. So today I want to share with you 3 ideas that I hope will illuminate how we can teach from a culturally relevant perspective. One is developing students' positive math identities. Another is sharing resources to help you build a culturally relevant math curriculum. And the last one is a policy change that I really think is necessary, and many agree, if we want equity in math education. So, next slide, and then next slide. So, math identity has to do with, yep, you can stay on math identity. Math identity has to do with how students feel about themselves. There are way too many students that still say, when will I ever use this? Not the data science students, but when will I ever use this in reference to the math that we teach? Even our young students, when we ask them about mathematics, they think mathematics is something you do on paper and you get an answer. In NCTM's Catalyzing Change series, they talk about broadening the purpose of mathematics and bringing joy to mathematics. Now, this is something that I really believe in, and I believe we must do that. So, math identity has to do with our own belief about our ability to do math for our own benefit. It's also heavily impacted by what others think of us and our math ability. For instance, teacher expectations, how our fellow students position us. We know that in the math class, there's certain students that are positioned as high. Everybody wants to be in their group. And others that are positioned as low. Oh, he can't really do this. Or she can't really do this. And also, it has to do with even with our parents and caregivers and their beliefs about math. So you can go on. Now, here's the mirror in the window metaphor. So we need to target math identity with mirrors and windows. As teachers, we must provide opportunities for students to see themselves in the curriculum. Those are our mirrors, such as drawing from students' community and cultural knowledge. We also need opportunities for them to view the broader world where they are learning about others, other worlds, other cultures. And we do this by providing a context for the math problems that we do. And also, we do this with the intention. So when we have math tasks, when Jo was talking about how her student was empowered, we should always ask ourselves, how does this math task empower our students? With culturally relevant pedagogy, one of the things Gloria Latson-Billings said was, these tasks and this type of pedagogy empower students. So if you're not empowering students with a math task, then why are we doing it? So I would like you in the chat, what norms do you have in place in your school, in your classroom, to help students, to help build their math identity? Let's say their positive math identity. So if you could put something in the chat that helps us to see, what are you doing that helps to build students' positive math identity? Definitely self-confidence is everything. Critical consciousness. I love that with social justice. A lot of what Jo was talking about, by using those data points and by using data, we're looking at social, lots of times, inequities, right? But it helps students to critically examine the things that impact their lives. A lot of times, teachers are sometimes afraid to talk about those things, but students are experiencing those things. So we have to get over that fear and make sure our administrators are with us, right? Because that's part of it too. Is a lot of times teachers are not sure, well, what will the administrators think? Well, they have to be on board too. We need a little playfulness, some math autobiographies. We learn so much when we ask students about their math, their math life. How has math treated you? What do you like about math? What are some things that you wish you could do in math? Asset-based assessment. So there's all of these different things. Metacognition, reflecting on the work and the effort, not just on that score that we get at the end. Next slide. Thank you so much. Oh, I see Monica. Hey, Monica. I have my students here tonight. I feel empowered by having them here. I forgot you guys were on. Okay, next. So anyway, one quick example of pulling in cultural knowledge is to have students learn about diverse mathematicians like Dr. Gloria Gilmer. So she studied the mathematics of hair braiding and found mathematics such as tessellations, fractals, and even algebra, having students study how to generalize a growing pattern like the one we see with the dots. So those dots there represent braids. And as we go down the hairline, we have less and less braids. Well, how many if we have 5 rows? How many if we have 10 rows? How many if we have n rows? Anyway, I introduced Dr. Gilmer to a group of teachers, and immediately one of the teachers, who happened to be a Black woman, felt like she could relate and felt like she was seen. And she immediately put together a lesson featuring Dr. Gilmer that she shared with her students. And she had students talk about tessellations they found in their communities. And she also talked about the mathematics and the business end of hair braiding. Next slide. So my colleagues and I told you, we've been working on this for a while, at least 2 decades. My colleagues, Lou Matthews and Yolanda Parker, and we wrote a book on culturally relevant math tasks, engaging in culturally relevant math tasks, fostering hope. And the task building actions that we focus on are making sure that we have rigor. A lot of people like that word rigor in mathematics, but the rigor is not only towards the math, but also towards the culture. Then we go on to cultural relevance, centering all the work that we do in the math task on community and cultural knowledge. And last but not least, agency, making sure that we empower students, but also making sure that students can empathize. When we work with students, and if they're not from an urban area, but they're learning about equity, and equality, they should still be able to empathize with students that might be experiencing, homelessness, even though they're not homeless. So these are the kinds of things that we're talking about, taking social active, collective action, so that students are working together. Next slide. So these are some of the resources that I've used, and certainly not all of them, but some of these are books about diverse mathematicians and stories about diverse mathematicians. What about websites like Mathematically Gifted and Black? One that I don't have on there that I should is We Are Indigenous Mathematicians. That's a website. And there's also Lathisms. So I need to update my slide. But those are some other websites besides Mathematically Gifted and Black that highlight diverse mathematicians. And then we also have Choosing to See, and Pam Seda and Kendall Brown. They talk more about instructional strategies to help us to include all students. So we have historic books that have more historical references, like Beyond Banneker, because representation matters. And this is the reason why I want you to see some of the books that you might use in some of these tools. Next slide. I believe that I'm going to have a link to the books and to the websites. I'm just about out of time, but I want to make sure I get to this last slide or two. Basically, I want to mention that there are some things that we have to change at the policy level, at the school district level, at the state level. If we don't, it will remain a challenge for us to have equitable math programming. So there are some resources there to assist math and building leaders in the process of things like detracking math. The NCSM and the ASSM. Also, this I'll tell you, the state of Connecticut, where I live, we have 3 organizations, which is what really we need. We need other states to follow suit. So CCLM, the Connecticut Council of Leaders of Math, the Associated Teachers of Math in Connecticut, Atomic, and AMTEC, the Associated Association of Math Teacher Educators in Connecticut. They all got together and wrote a position statement on equitable practices in math ed. So I just want to say that we can work together to do these things. There's a QR code there for the NCSM position statement. What else do I want to say? Oh, the Connecticut statement, they talk about equitable math, but in particular, they also talk about detracking. And what I like about these resources is that they give you action steps, They give you recommendations, and they also provide strategies for this process. Next slide. One of the things about detracking is that you can't just, say we're going to detract math. You have to make sure that you get teachers ready, that you get students ready, and you get families ready. There was a school that tried to detract math by just saying students can choose what they want to take, and the students still ended up taking whatever the classes that they were used to taking. If you're not used to taking a quote unquote higher level class, you're not going to take it just because all of a sudden we say you can take whatever class you want. So we have to make sure that we help students and parents. I'm going to go to the next slide and just go ahead and finish this off. Next slide. More resources. These are NCSM infographics. So a lot of this stuff can be found on mathedleadership.org website. Next slide, and I think that's it. Okay. I wanted to make sure that I got through the slides and are able to take questions. I know that went by fast, but we are recording this, and so I would love to have a question.
So yes, we are running out of time, but I do want to close this up to kind of tie everything that we kind of heard today. And so my question is, we know that students appropriate teacher discourse, educator discourse, what we bring to the table, our cultures, our values, our beliefs. And Shelley, you mentioned the need that we need to work together to change policies, right, at this higher level. Practices and then distribution of resources. How might we manage conflicts and tensions with the current narratives that we have? How might
I
we go
think
about
we
it?
I think we have to change the narratives. We have to get away from, deficit language. So instead of talking about, an achievement gap, for example, we talk about an opportunity gap, because when students are provided the opportunities and support, they are usually able to step up to the plate, and they are usually able to do the work, just like that student we heard in Joe's video. So students want to do things, but they want things that are meaningful. So that means we have to work on their math identity. It can't be where, students continue to believe that they can't do math. They just can't do the math of the past. But we have to change the way math is provided to students. And also just, students don't mind working hard, having rigorous math if the math is meaningful. So I think those are the things that we need to think about. If we want students to see the beauty of math, we have to allow them to step into the math. And when they do, they become engaged, they become empowered, and they do the work. They learn because they're learning something that's meaningful to them, connected to them.
Shelley, I mean, you have the final word. I'm going to pass it over to Shakia now to close us off. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was awesome. I had high expectations and you delivered and exceeded. Thank you so much for your time, your expertise, your energy, the information. This was a very engaging session. Thank you to every attendee for your time and active participation in the chat or with the emojis. This session has been recorded and will be available on the Just Equations website at a later date. And as a reminder, you all have an opportunity to connect in the lounge that can be accessed by clicking the word lounge located at the top of your screen. And everyone is welcome to join us tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern, for more phenomenal deep dive sessions. Thank you and take care.